In the dead of night, Margaret Garner ran through the thick, shadowed woods, her children clinging to her skirts, their small breaths trembling with fear. Behind them, the relentless pursuit of men with torches and the weight of a world determined to control her echoed through the trees. Every step was a desperate gamble between life and capture, every rustle in the undergrowth a whisper of doom. The forest seemed alive, pressing in on her, hiding her while testing her, as if it knew the impossible choices she was about to face. Cornered, hunted, and haunted by a past that refused to let her go, Margaret stood on the edge of a decision so tragic that it would echo through history. This is the story of a woman's courage and despair, of a secret America tried to bury, and of the haunting price of survival in a world ruled by cruelty and oppression. Margaret Garner moved through the night like a shadow herself, her body pressed low against the damp earth, her children clinging to her skirts with small, trembling hands. The moon had hidden behind thick clouds, leaving the world in an oppressive darkness that pressed against her skin like a living thing. Each step was measured, deliberate, because she knew that a single misstep could betray her to the hunters behind her, their shouts and torches slicing through the trees like knives. Her heart pounded not only from exertion, but from the awareness that every movement carried the weight of a future she could not yet imagine. She listened to the forest in a way that was almost unnatural, her ears straining for the smallest snap of a twig, the faintest whisper of a footfall. The swampy ground threatened to betray her at every turn, sucking at her worn shoes, pulling her closer to the mire with each step. Yet she pressed forward, driven by desperation and a fear that burned hotter than the sun she had left behind. Her mind swirled with fragmented memories of her children, the stolen moments of tenderness she had snatched in the secrecy of back rooms and dark corners, moments now amplified into a lifetime of longing and regret. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness. The distant hoot of an owl became a warning, the rustle of leaves sounded like a pursuit, and the wind through the branches whispered secrets she could not yet decipher. She felt the weight of the world pressing on her chest, not just in the form of physical exhaustion, but in the knowledge that she carried with her the legacy of chains, of brutal hands and broken promises. Each breath came ragged and urgent, mingling with the murmurs of her children as they tried to mimic her silent movements, their small faces pale and wide-eyed. She felt the eyes of the night on her, imagining every shadow to be the face of the overseer, every shifting branch a reaching hand. The darkness was complete, and yet in that darkness, Margaret felt an almost surreal clarity, a sharpness that cut through the fear like a blade. She became acutely aware of the forest smells, the damp rot of fallen leaves, the acrid tang of wet earth, the metallic hint of blood she hoped would never be hers, and yet feared might follow her anyway. The urgency to move forward was matched only by the weight of her past, a past that seemed to trail her through the swamps as if the night itself had memory. The children's whispered questions, their small bodies trembling in the cold, forced her to steel herself, to move with the precision of someone who understood that life and death hung on each careful step she took, while behind her, the sounds of pursuit, muted but persistent, promised a reckoning that would not wait for sunrise. The sound of pursuit was never far behind, a relentless drumbeat in the darkness that pressed Margaret Garner forward with a mixture of terror and determination. She could hear them, shouts muffled by distance but growing steadily louder, the crunch of boots over fallen leaves, the occasional bark of a dog somewhere deeper in the shadows, and each sound seemed to carry with it the weight of inevitable capture. The torches flickered in the distance, their light cutting through the blackness like fingers reaching for her, and she felt the heat of their approach even before she could see them fully. Every rustle in the undergrowth became a potential threat, every snap of a twig a harbinger of doom, and her senses sharpened to an almost painful degree, each nerve ending alert to the slightest indication of danger. Her children pressed close, their small hands clutching at her skirts, their eyes wide with fear, and she felt a sharp pang of guilt and protectiveness, knowing that the choices she made now would shape their lives forever. She forced herself to breathe evenly, to move with care despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins, yet the pressure of the chase threatened to undo her carefully measured steps. The sound of voices called out intermittently, harsh and commanding. The overseer's words cutting across the night with a cruel clarity, and she imagined them closing in from all sides. Invisible predators navigating the forest as if it were their own hunting ground. Every shadow seemed to twist into a shape, a face, a hand ready to seize her, and she could feel the cold sweat beating along her spine. Her mind raced, calculating paths and possible hiding places, retracing the route she had memorized hours before in the faint light of dusk, and she realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that the forest was both a sanctuary and a snare. The uneven ground, the tangle of roots and undergrowth, might hide her from sight, but it also slowed her pace, gave the hunters time to close in, and offered the threat of injury with each misstep. Yet even in the face of this relentless threat, a stubborn spark of hope burned within her, a drive to keep moving, to find some path to freedom, however narrow and uncertain it might be. Her heart raced not just from fear, but from the burden of responsibility, the awareness that every second she delayed could mean capture or worse. The forest seemed alive with the echo of pursuit, the shadows stretching and twisting as if mocking her, and she could sense the inevitability of confrontation pressing against her back, demanding a reckoning that she could neither escape nor delay. The torches drew nearer, the voices sharper, and each step became a test of endurance and courage, a dangerous dance between the forest's concealment and the overseer's relentless drive, while her mind wrestled with impossible questions of survival and the choices that must come with the inescapable presence of those who hunted her. Margaret Garner slipped deeper into the forest, the thick canopy swallowing the remaining light and leaving her in a shadowed world where every tree seemed to breathe, and every branch whispered secrets she could almost understand. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and each inhalation brought with it the faint metallic tang of fear. She moved cautiously, knowing that while the forest offered concealment, it also had a voice of its own, one that could betray her if she failed to listen. The trees loomed above her, their trunks gnarled and twisted like the hands of ancient sentinels, and their branches swayed as if murmuring in a language only the wind could interpret. It felt as though the forest recognized her presence, that it measured her desperation and mirrored it in every rustle and shift. Small animals scuttled in the undergrowth, startled by her passage, their sudden movements triggering jolts of alarm that reminded her she was still very much being pursued. Shadows fell across her path like moving walls, sometimes resembling figures that crouched and watched, and she could feel the forest's strange energy pressing against her shoulders, nudging her in directions she hadn't intended to go. Every step required careful judgment, for the uneven roots and hidden bogs could trap her in an instant. Yet she felt compelled to move forward, drawn by the forest's strange, almost sentient guidance. The whispers of the leaves became a chorus, sometimes soft, sometimes urgent, carrying hints of the path ahead or warnings of unseen dangers. And Margaret found herself attuned to the rhythm of the wilderness in a way that heightened both fear and clarity. Her children, pale and silent, followed as best they could, their small hands clutching at her skirts, their trust in her an anchor against the rising panic. The light of distant torches occasionally flickered through the dense trunks, reminding her that the world outside the forest still hunted her. Yet within this living labyrinth, she felt a paradoxical mixture of refuge and menace. Each bend in the path, each cluster of shadows, seemed charged with potential revelation, as though the forest was hiding not just physical obstacles, but truths too heavy for the open world. She pressed on, heart pounding, senses sharpened, feeling the weight of history and memory woven into the very soil beneath her feet, as if the forest carried the burdens of countless lives before her. The interplay of darkness and sound, of scent and shadow, molded her movements, guiding her through the labyrinthine woods while the unseen eyes of pursuers drew ever closer. And though the forest held her in its embrace, sheltering her from immediate capture, it demanded attention and respect, its whispers echoing the relentless pressure of the world she fled from while shaping the path she must follow in a dangerous, uncharted sanctuary. Margaret Garner found herself pressed against the thick trunk of an ancient oak, the weight of her children's small bodies leaning into her with silent pleading. and she realized that the pursuit had closed in to an unbearable immediacy. The voices behind her had sharpened, no longer distant echoes but urgent, commanding calls that pierced the darkness, and the torchlight now glimmered through the trees like cruel fingers stretching to seize her. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the forest, for all its twisting paths and protective shadows, had funneled her into a narrow clearing where escape seemed impossible. The desperation clawed at her chest, a raw, visceral force, urging her to protect her children at any cost. Her mind raced, grappling with impossible choices, and she could feel the sharp sting of inevitability pressing down. The world outside had made her cornered, and there would be no mercy for those who tried to outrun it. Each breath was a struggle, ragged and urgent, as she weighed the fleeting seconds before the pursuers would close the distance. And in that suffocating moment, the darkness around her felt almost alive, bending to witness the terror of her choice. She saw their faces in the flickering torchlight. The overseer's expressions hardened with authority and expectation, and she felt the bitter knowledge that no argument, no plea, could sway the relentless force of the society that hunted her. The children stirred, sensing the danger with a clarity that only innocence can perceive, and their small hands clutched at her skirts with a mixture of trust and fear that made her chest ache. The idea of capture was unbearable, and her mind conjured every possible scenario. Imprisonment, separation, the loss of everything she held sacred, each vision sharpening the edge of dread. And in the heart of that suffocating fear, a thought flickered, dark and desperate, that to preserve the essence of her children's lives, she might have to take a path no human should ever contemplate. The forest seemed to close around her, its gnarled roots and twisting undergrowth both protector and witness, holding her in a spotlight of impossibility where every choice carried unimaginable weight. Time stretched and contracted, moments blending into a tense, almost ritualistic anticipation as her body tensed for the action that might define the rest of their lives. The night, thick with oppressive silence and punctuated by distant shouts, seemed to demand a reckoning, forcing Margaret to confront the cruel arithmetic of survival in a world that had stripped her of mercy, safety, and freedom, leaving only the raw, unyielding necessity of a choice that would haunt generations yet unborn. Hidden among the dense undergrowth, a figure watched Margaret Garner with eyes wide and heart pounding, a silent witness to a moment that defied understanding. The observer crouched low, pressed against the cold, damp earth, straining to make sense of the shadows before them, the flickering torchlight illuminating the impossible scene in harsh, intermittent bursts. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch, the ragged breathing of the fleeing mother, cut through the night air, each one a pulse in the tense rhythm of fear and anticipation. From this concealed vantage, the witness could see the raw weight of Margaret's desperation, the way her body moved with a mixture of calculated caution and instinctual urgency, her children clinging to her skirts as though the smallest misstep might shatter their fragile safety. The observer's mind spun, trying to comprehend the decisions being made in that shadowed clearing, decisions born from a world that demanded impossible sacrifices, and they felt the tension of moral conflict tighten around their chest like a vice. Should they intervene, risk revealing themselves, and perhaps change the course of events, or remain hidden, silent, a ghost bearing witness to an act that would forever haunt the land and the memory of those involved? The forest seemed to conspire with the observer, its shadows providing cover, its whispering leaves carrying fragments of sound that suggested movement and menace alike. Every flicker of torchlight that pierced the darkness drew a shiver, every crack of a distant branch raised the stakes, as if the night itself understood the precarious balance of power, fear, and choice at play. In that tense concealment, the observer felt a connection to Margaret that transcended comprehension, a shared understanding of the terror of being hunted, the sharp edge of responsibility, and the suffocating pressure of circumstances beyond one's control. The witness could sense the inexorable approach of the pursuers, the authority and cruelty they carried in their every step. Yet they also recognized the forest as both ally and judge, hiding Margaret while silently weighing her actions against the unforgiving moral calculus imposed by the world outside. Time seemed to slow, each heartbeat stretched into an eternity, each glance and whisper amplified by the oppressive darkness. The observer's presence added a layer of complexity to the night, a silent tension that mirrored the inner turmoil of Margaret herself, the clash of fear and love, desperation and calculation, all unfolding beneath the twisted boughs and shadowed paths. And as the minutes dragged on, every sense heightened to an unbearable degree. The witness realized that what they had seen, or what they might witness, was more than a singular event. It was a reflection of history's cruel design, a moment suspended between survival and tragedy, moral ambiguity and the haunting certainty that some acts, once committed, could never be erased. Margaret Garner pressed deeper into the heart of the forest, the oppressive darkness wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. Each step a careful negotiation with roots that threatened to trip her and bogs that could swallow her whole. The pursuit, relentless and unyielding, seemed to echo through the trees, every distant shout, every bark of a dog, every snap of a branch a reminder that freedom was fleeting and fragile. Her children clung to her skirts, small bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear, and their presence both anchored and weighed her down, a constant reminder of the stakes pressing her forward. The forest itself seemed to pulse with life, almost sentient in its shifting shadows and whispering leaves, offering concealment while simultaneously reminding her of its dangers. She moved with careful precision, feeling each uneven surface beneath her feet, listening for the subtle cues of danger and opportunity that only a landscape she had memorized could provide. Every sound was magnified, from the low hum of insects to the distant roar of flowing water, each carrying with it the tension of possibility, a hiding place, a trap, or the encroaching threat of discovery. The children's soft whispers, trying to mirror her silence, reminded her that each decision had consequences far beyond her own survival. As the torches flickered on the distant horizon, their light penetrating the forest canopy in fleeting glimpses, she felt the relentless pressure of time pressing down, urging her to keep moving even as exhaustion gnawed at her limbs. Shadows danced across her path, sometimes resembling figures that crouched and watched, and she could feel the forest pressing in from all sides, a living labyrinth that both protected and tested her. Her mind raced, calculating distances, memorizing turns, anticipating the sounds of pursuit. Yet the forest kept her on edge with every unexpected creak, every rustle, every hint of movement. Sleep and rest were luxuries she could not afford, and each step carried the weight of survival, memory, and the haunting knowledge that the past and the present collided in this relentless chase. The forest swallowed sound and light, but it could not erase the pounding rhythm of her heart or the urgency that drove her forward, nor could it fully shield her from the shadows that seemed to stretch across time itself, echoing with the relentless pursuit of a world determined to claim her. And as the night dragged on, the oppressive tension coiled tighter around her chest, every rustle, every distant voice, every glimmer of torchlight reinforcing the terrifying reality that though she might escape momentarily, the world outside the forest and the shadows it carried would never relent, and the fragile safety of the present hung, suspended over the ever-looming thread of discovery. The forest began to thin as dawn approached, the first faint light brushing against the treetops. Yet, Margaret Garner could not allow herself to believe in its mercy. The shadows that had pursued her through the night still lingered at the edges of her consciousness, echoing in every sound, in every rustle of leaves, in every distant bird call that might signal danger rather than life. Her body was battered, muscles screaming from hours of relentless movement, yet her mind remained alert, haunted by the choices she had made and the ones still dangling precariously before her. The memory of the clearing, of the impossible decision she had faced, pressed upon her like a physical weight, mingling with the adrenaline that had carried her through the darkest hours. She could feel the lingering presence of the overseers, their authority and cruelty etched into her memory, a constant reminder that the world outside the forest was both unforgiving and unrelenting. Each step she took seemed to echo through the valley of her own fears, a rhythm of survival that was as fragile as it was necessary. The children moved beside her with quiet obedience, their trust in her a fragile thread connecting them to hope, and she carried that trust like a sacred burden, aware that every misstep, every lapse, could shatter it forever. The landscape seemed to shift under her gaze, the line between sanctuary and danger blurring, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, judging her passage through its shadowed corridors. She thought of the generations that had suffered before her, their pain and resistance echoing in the very soil beneath her feet, and a chilling awareness settled over her that her story, though momentarily hidden, would not remain secret forever. The wind carried voices, distant and distorted, that seemed to whisper not only warnings but the weight of history itself, reminding her that the acts of the desperate are often recorded in memory long after the world pretends to forget. Every clearing, every bend in the path, carried the dual weight of potential safety and latent peril, and Margaret moved with a combination of acute calculation and instinctive fear, knowing that the fragile freedom she clutched was always subject to the inexorable pressure of the world beyond. And though the immediate danger of the overseers seemed to recede with the coming light, the resonance of what had transpired, the choices, the desperate acts, the silent witness of the forest, lingered in her bones and in the shadows, echoing across the landscape as if the earth itself remembered the tragedy. Her flight through the night became more than a story of survival. It was a haunting testament to human desperation, to acts committed under impossible circumstances, and to the truths that societies prefer to bury, yet which insist upon returning in whispers, in shadows, and in the echoing weight of history that refuses to let go.